Now, turning that slightly around, in terms of a management perspective, do you see blocks that you just say, we don't even want to manage that, or will you take on anything that's on offer, Eric?
No, we do see that quite a lot.
Right.
I mean, location is key. But also product is key. I mean, there are locations, certain cities, certain places where somebody offers us a product and we don't want to touch it because we know it will be hard to let. You'll have to reduce the rents if you want to get it away, and it just becomes a headache. But interestingly, talking about historically the way things have moved, we have, when I went to university the first time, I lived in a room. My wife, who I met later, she went to the halls. But nowadays, whereas before there was always this rite of passage, first year in halls, next year you move on. I was with one of our managers in a scheme, 300 rooms, they've got 3 first years. Everybody else is second and third years. They're just looking at a different product. They like the security of a trusted product, of a uniform standard, of a brand, if you like.
Okay, and I think that's a very interesting thing from a potential investor point of view, the way that is changing from the experiences that these guys had, that we're moving from first years going into years 2 and year 3 in student accommodation, but the quality has got to be good. Now, turning that around to you two guys, what's the worst thing you think that when you were looking, or what you see now, that from an investor point of view, we're always looking at it from a return and where's the rental growth. I don't know how much we actually think, is this what the student really wants, or can we just get away with it? And generally, the developer gets away with what he can. Of course, each year he has to improve it because of what's going on. What do you think is the biggest mistake that you see being made now that...
Well, for me, the hardest thing was the transition period from accommodation to private residence. It's kind of this vicious cycle of having a proof of address, trying to find a good broadband deal, and then signing these contracts, and not knowing whether you'll be in that flat for the next 2 years and signing those contracts. So for me, it was all about this whole transition period, and not to beat a dead horse, but location was important for me.
Right.
So if I did have private accommodation nearby, I might well have chosen it. Or if I had a flat nearby which had a set rent, which included broadband and TV licenses and everything, I think I would probably opt for that now.
Right, that's interesting.
Whereas that transition period initially was kind of difficult for me, having to sort out all these papers for the first time in my life and getting all that.
So if the quality was there, you would certainly probably still be in private accommodation. Yeah. Right.
I think the location's really important.
Yeah.
We were quite lucky at Newcastle because we all moved to Jesmond. But even if you were late and looking for somewhere, all the best places were taken pretty quickly, and you were left with some pretty undesirable places to consider. And now I've moved to London, and I'm at law school in Waterloo. I've been quite lucky with my accommodation, but I have got friends who just commute in from the countryside, from Hampshire and the surrounding area, purely because of the expense of housing and the fact that it doesn't deliver everything that they're looking for.
So over to you. Any questions for the gang? Any questions for our graduates? Any questions for our grown-ups? Any questions for anyone in between? Yes, sir. I'll come down with the microphone so we can all hear it. It's very exciting. What's your name? Stephen. Stephen, do you want to stand up, or are you happy reclining there?
Relax where I am. I'm just interested in the overall market supply and demand. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stories at the moment that number of students are going to start going down, having gone up quite a bit over the last few years. And clearly there's been quite a lot of supply in terms of student accommodation that's come on stream in the last few years, and sooner or later they're going to cross, I guess. And I just wondered, where we are in that dynamic, and when the supply starts to overtake demand, and therefore when rents potentially become less attractive in terms of their growth profile.
Okay, Eri, I think perhaps start with you on that one, because you are geographically spread and see where rents are going.
I think we are seeing government talking about cuts, but these cuts are not material. We saw UCAS announcing record numbers of applications. We've got a very strong international market. So materially, at the moment, there's still plenty of demand to come and study in the UK. In terms of accommodation, we've got so much accommodation at universities that has become very tired. It was built 60s and 70s, that is not appropriate, that needs to be refurbished, that needs to be pulled down, and that universities haven't got money to invest in. So those sort of blocks will come out of the market, or they will be privatized, and it will be a position for investors to come in and provide a higher quality solution, a higher quality stock to meet that demand. So I think that the next stage is actually going to be a large privatization of student accommodation. You know, it will become far larger than we've expected before. I think that you will always have product in certain places that is not appropriate, buying badly, etc.
Do you guys want to come in on that at all?
Quite fortuitously, I got sent this by CBRE today, and it says, funding cuts not deep enough to hurt accommodation market. They're basically saying the overseas students will, the university will take on the overseas students paying their way, and there will be more demand for high-end accommodation. But I think taking it away, there's actually moves. Look at where students go if they're not in halls of residence, or what we call HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. Now they're under immense licensing regulations at the moment. We're having a lot of problems with our properties, and we're actually selling them out because they're too much of an embuggeration. But what the government is now saying is that they want actually to be a separate use class, and so that an HMO has a planning class, and therefore they can limit the number of a proportionate amount, the number of those HMOs in an area. Now, if Nottingham is a classic example, there's basically a student area. You wouldn't want to live there because the only buyers of those houses are investors in student accommodation in terraced houses. So if that comes through, we hope it doesn't, but if that goes through, again, it's going to push students out of the Victorian terrace into the halls.
So in short, don't worry if now British school leavers start working in Argos, because you'll get your money back from overseas students taking over those accommodations. So not to panic. Any other questions?
Sorry, just to finish off on that one, I think,
Yes.
again, from the investment point of view, what this starts, we're starting to get trends here, which are very similar, actually. This is why I think it is quite a lot to do with residential, but we talked about, we now know its location, we're talking about quality, but with a student, one has got to look at where the international students go. Because that, you know, if these government cuts, and this is only the beginning, but don't forget the government said we're not cutting education, and here we are having cuts in education. The first year, God knows what it's going to be like in years 3 and 4, but as long as the international students keep coming in, which there's no sign of any abatement there, then the investor has to look very carefully at the percentage of international students at which universities and why, and make sure they focus on those as a general investment strategy. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah.